Part 1 Hook Writing. Have you ever noticed something strange? The moment life starts moving in the right direction, a new opportunity appears. A relationship begins to feel real. A dream finally starts taking shape. There's often a small voice inside you that whispers, "Don't get too excited. What if it doesn't last? What if something goes wrong?" Most people think that voice is caution. They think it's wisdom. But what if it's something else entirely? What if that voice is actually an old story? A story your nervous system learned years ago. And what if that story has been quietly shaping your reality ever since? Today we're going to explore a fascinating idea found in neuroscience, psychology, and consciousness research. The idea that your life is influenced not only by what you think, but by the state you carry into every experience. Because if your inner state helps shape what you perceive, what you notice, and how you respond, then acting as if things work out might not be wishful thinking at all. It might be one of the most powerful shifts you can make. Part 1. The hidden program running your life. There's something strange about the way most people move through life. They believe they are making decisions based on the present moment. They believe they are responding to what's happening right now. They believe they are seeing reality exactly as it is. But what if that isn't entirely true? What if, long before you consciously make a choice, something deeper has already influenced it? Something older, something quieter, something so familiar that you rarely notice it. Think about this for a moment. Have you ever walked into a situation already expecting a certain outcome? Maybe you met someone new and immediately assumed they would eventually leave. Maybe an opportunity appeared and part of you already believed it wouldn't work out. Maybe success finally started moving toward you, but instead of excitement, you felt anxiety. Not because anything had gone wrong, but because you were already preparing for the possibility that it would. Most people think these reactions are simply personality traits. They call themselves pessimistic, realistic, cautious, guarded. But beneath all those labels lies something much more important: a story. A silent story your nervous system has been carrying for years, and that story may be shaping far more of your reality than you realize. The fascinating thing about the human brain is that it is not designed primarily to make you happy. It is designed to keep you alive, and from the perspective of survival, certainty is incredibly valuable. The brain constantly searches for patterns. It studies the past. It remembers pain. It tracks disappointment. It records moments when things didn't go according to plan. Then it uses those experiences to predict what might happen next. From an evolutionary perspective, this is brilliant. If touching fire once caused pain, remembering that experience protects you from repeating it. If a dangerous situation appeared before, recognizing similar signs helps you survive. The brain is constantly asking one question: what should I expect? The problem is that this system doesn't only learn from physical danger, it learns from emotional experiences too. A broken promise, a painful rejection, a failure that left a mark, a moment when you trusted and got hurt. The nervous system records all of it, and over time, those experiences begin forming assumptions. Life becomes interpreted through those assumptions, without realizing it. Many people start carrying invisible expectations into every new experience. Expectations that sound like, "Things never work out for me. People always leave. Success is temporary. Good things don't last." The strange part is that most people never consciously choose these beliefs. They simply absorb them through experience. And after enough repetition, the beliefs stop feeling like beliefs. They start feeling like reality. That is where the real challenge begins. Because once something feels like reality, you stop questioning it. You stop examining it. You stop noticing that it's even there. Imagine wearing a pair of tinted glasses your entire life. At first you would notice the color, but eventually the tint would become normal. You would assume the world itself looked that way. The same thing happens with the stories carried by the nervous system. The story becomes invisible, and when something becomes invisible, it gains enormous influence. This is one of the reasons two people can experience the exact same situation and walk away with completely different conclusions. One person sees possibility, another sees risk. One sees opportunity, another sees potential failure. One feels excitement, another feels dread. The external situation may be identical. The difference exists inside the observer. This is where modern neuroscience becomes incredibly interesting. Researchers have discovered that the brain is not simply reacting to reality moment by moment. in many ways. It is predicting reality before it arrives. Your mind constantly creates expectations based on previous experiences. Then it compares incoming information against those expectations. In other words, the brain is not just observing, it is anticipating. And anticipation changes perception. Think about walking into a room full of strangers. If you expect people to judge you, your attention naturally gravitates toward signs of judgment. A neutral expression suddenly looks negative. A brief silence feels uncomfortable. A casual comment sounds critical. Meanwhile, signs of acceptance often go unnoticed, not because they aren't there, but because your attention has been trained elsewhere. The mind is incredibly loyal to the stories it already believes. It searches for evidence that confirms them. This isn't weakness. This isn't failure. It's simply how prediction systems work. The challenge is that many of the predictions guiding your life today may have been created years ago, perhaps decades ago, at a time when you were operating with far less understanding, far less awareness, and far fewer choices. Yet those old predictions still influence how you interpret the present. A childhood experience becomes an adult expectation. An old disappointment becomes a future assumption. A past wound becomes a lens through which new experiences are viewed. And because the lens feels normal, most people never recognize it. They assume they are seeing reality clearly, when in fact they are seeing reality through layers of old conditioning. Now, here's the important distinction. This doesn't mean your experiences aren't real. It doesn't mean challenges don't exist. It doesn't mean life is always easy. What it means is that your internal state influences how those experiences are perceived and responded to, and that changes everything. Because if your current reality is being filtered through predictions created by the past, then changing your future may require more than changing your circumstances. It may require changing the assumptions you carry into those circumstances, the assumptions hidden beneath thought, beneath behavior, beneath conscious awareness, the assumptions that quietly whisper. This is how life usually goes. Most people spend years trying to force external change. They change jobs, move cities and relationships, start new projects, create new goals, and sometimes those changes help. But often the same patterns return. Different faces, different places, different situations. Yet somehow the emotional experience feels strangely familiar. Why? Because the external environment changed, but the internal program remained the same. The story followed them. The expectation traveled with them. The prediction survived the transition, and until the deeper pattern becomes visible, it continues influencing the future in ways that feel almost invisible. This is why awareness matters, not because awareness instantly solves everything, but because awareness creates space. The moment you become aware of a pattern, you are no longer completely identified with it. You become the observer, and observation changes things. For the first time, you begin noticing the silent assumptions that have been guiding your choices. You notice the moments you automatically brace for disappointment. You notice the expectation of failure before an opportunity even unfolds. You notice the subtle ways your body prepares for outcomes that haven't happened. And once you notice them, something extraordinary becomes possible. You can question them. You can ask, is this reality, or is this simply a prediction? A prediction created by experiences that belong to another chapter of my life? Because the future is not the past, and yet many people unknowingly approach it as if it is. The good news is that the brain is not fixed. The nervous system is not frozen. The stories you carry are not permanent. They were learned, and what is learned can be updated. Not overnight. Not through force, not through pretending, but through awareness, through experience, through repeatedly showing the mind and body that a different outcome is possible. And that journey begins with one simple realization. You are not just living inside reality. You are living inside a relationship with reality. And that relationship is shaped by the stories you carry within you. The question is, are those stories helping create the future you want, or are they quietly recreating the past? Part 2. Why your brain sees what it expects to see. What if the biggest limitation in your life isn't what you lack, but what you're unable to see? Think about that for a moment. Most people assume that reality is obvious. They believe that if an opportunity exists, they will notice it. If a solution is available, they will find it. If something important appears in front of them, they will naturally recognize it. But science tells a very different story. The human brain is not designed to show you everything. It is designed to show you what it believes is relevant. And that distinction changes everything. Right now, as you listen to these words, there are thousands of details around you that you're completely unaware of. Sounds, sensations, movements, patterns. Your brain filters most of them out automatically, not because they aren't there, but because your mind has decided they aren't important. Imagine if you suddenly became aware of every sound, every movement, every sensation happening around you at the same time. The amount of information would be overwhelming, so the brain creates shortcuts. It decides what deserves attention and what doesn't. This makes life manageable, but it also creates an invisible problem, because sometimes the things being filtered out are exactly what you're looking for. There's a famous psychological experiment that demonstrates this perfectly. Participants were asked to watch a video and count the number of basketball passes between players. Simple task. Nothing unusual. Most people focused carefully. They counted every pass. They concentrated intensely. But in the middle of the video, something bizarre happened. A person wearing a gorilla suit walked directly through the scene, stopped, looked at the camera, then walked away, and incredibly, many participants never saw the gorilla at all, not because they weren't paying attention, but because they were paying attention to something else. Their minds were so focused on one objective that everything outside that objective became invisible. This phenomenon is known as inattentional blindness, and it doesn't only happen in experiments. It happens every day. It happens in relationships. It happens in careers. It happens in personal growth. And it happens in the way you experience reality itself. When your nervous system expects disappointment, it becomes highly sensitive to signs of disappointment. When it expects rejection, it becomes skilled at finding rejection. When it expects failure, it becomes remarkably efficient at noticing obstacles. The mind begins collecting evidence to support its existing assumptions, not because it's trying to sabotage you, but because consistency feels safe. The brain would rather be familiar than correct. Read that again. The brain would rather be familiar than correct. That means many people spend years unconsciously proving old beliefs true, not because those beliefs are accurate, but because those beliefs are known, and the known always feels safer than the unknown. This is where perception becomes incredibly important, because perception is not passive. Perception is active. You are not simply receiving information from the world. You are constantly interpreting it, shaping it, filtering it, organizing it, creating meaning from it, and the quality of that interpretation depends heavily on the state you're carrying within you. A person walking into a room expecting criticism sees different things than someone expecting connection. A person entering a challenge expecting failure notices different details than someone expecting growth. The environment may be identical, but the experience becomes completely different. This doesn't mean reality changes. It means access to reality changes. And that distinction matters, because what you notice influences what you choose. What you choose influences what you experience, and what you experience reinforces what you believe, creating a powerful cycle that repeats itself again and again. This is why changing beliefs isn't simply about thinking differently. It's about learning to perceive differently. It's about becoming aware of the filters through which you're viewing the world. Now let's go even deeper. There is an experiment in physics that continues to fascinate scientists more than a century after it was first conducted. The double-slit experiment. You may have heard of it before. Particles were fired toward a barrier containing two narrow openings. Scientists expected the particles to behave like tiny objects. Instead, something extraordinary happened. The particles behaved like waves. They spread out, interfered with themselves, created patterns that suggested they existed in multiple possibilities simultaneously. But then researchers introduced a measuring device. They attempted to observe which slit the particles passed through, and suddenly the behavior changed. The wave pattern disappeared. The particles behaved like solid objects again. The act of observation altered the outcome. Now it's important to be careful here. Human beings are not quantum particles, and quantum physics does not directly explain personal success, relationships, or everyday decisions. But there is a principle hidden inside this discussion that remains deeply relevant. Observation matters. The observer matters. And in human experience, the quality of observation shapes perception. Your attention is not neutral. Your expectations are not neutral. Your assumptions are not neutral. They influence what becomes visible to you. This is why two people can live in the same city, work in the same environment, face similar challenges, yet create completely different lives. One person constantly notices opportunities. Another constantly notices limitations. One sees possibilities. Another sees problems. One sees potential. Another sees risk. And over time, those differences compound, not because one person is more intelligent, not because one person is more deserving, but because attention directs energy, and energy directs action. The question then becomes, what is directing your attention? Fear? Doubt? Old conditioning, or possibility? Most people never ask themselves that question. They simply assume their perception is objective, but perception is never entirely objective. It is filtered through experience, through memory, through expectation, through emotion, through identity. This is why transformation begins not when reality changes, but when observation changes, when you begin noticing the lens itself, when you become aware of the assumptions shaping your interpretation of events, when you recognize that the story inside you may be influencing what you're able to see. Something powerful happens. The filter starts loosening. The grip of old expectations begins weakening, and new possibilities start appearing, not because they suddenly arrived, but because they were there all along. You simply couldn't see them before. This is where the journey becomes deeply personal, because understanding these ideas intellectually is only the beginning. The real question is this: if your perception has been shaped by years of conditioning, can it be reshaped? Can the nervous system learn a new way of seeing? Can the brain develop a different expectation of reality? Modern neuroscience says yes, and that's exactly where our journey leads next, because in the next part, we're going to explore something even more important than perception itself. We're going to explore the state you bring into life before anything happens, the hidden emotional posture that quietly determines how you respond to uncertainty, the difference between living in protection and living in creation. Because once you understand that distinction, Part 3, the power of trust, becoming the observer of a new reality. There is a kind of exhaustion that very few people ever talk about. Not the exhaustion of working too hard, not the exhaustion of carrying too many responsibilities. Something deeper, something quieter, the exhaustion of constantly preparing yourself for disappointment. You know this feeling. Something good starts happening. A new opportunity appears. A relationship begins to deepen. A dream starts moving closer. And instead of fully stepping into it, you pull back, just a little. Just enough to protect yourself. Just enough to avoid getting hurt if things don't work out. At first, it feels like wisdom. It feels mature, responsible, practical. But if you look closely, you'll discover something surprising. Most of the time, it isn't wisdom at all. It's fear. Fear disguised as intelligence, fear disguised as caution, fear disguised as realism. Because somewhere along the way, many of us learned a dangerous lesson. We learned that hope is risky, that trusting life is risky, that believing in good outcomes is risky. And so we developed armor, invisible armor, emotional armor, psychological armor, armor designed to protect us from pain. But here's the problem. The same armor that protects you from pain also protects you from possibility. It protects you from joy. It protects you from connection. It protects you from growth. And eventually, it protects you from becoming the person you were meant to be. Because life cannot fully reach a closed heart. Think about the moments that changed your life. The opportunities you almost didn't take. The people you almost didn't trust. The dreams you almost didn't pursue. What if fear had won in those moments? What if you had stayed hidden? What if you had remained protected? Many of the most meaningful experiences of your life would never have happened. And that's why this conversation matters. Because the future is not created only by what you do. It's influenced by the state from which you do it. A fearful action carries a different energy than a trusting action. A fearful decision creates a different experience than a trusting decision. And over time, those differences compound, not dramatically, not overnight, but quietly, day after day, choice after choice, moment after moment, until an entirely different life begins to emerge. Carl Jung once suggested that what remains unconscious directs our lives, and we call it fate. Think about that. How many of your reactions are actually choices, and how many are simply old programs repeating themselves? How many opportunities have you avoided because your past convinced you they wouldn't work? How many relationships ended before they even began because your nervous system expected abandonment? How many dreams remained unfinished because a part of you had already decided failure was inevitable? These are difficult questions, but they are important questions, because awareness changes everything. The moment you become aware of a pattern, you create distance from it. You stop being the pattern. You become the observer of the pattern, and the observer always has more power than the program. This is why transformation doesn't begin with changing your circumstances. It begins with changing your relationship to your circumstances. It begins with noticing the moment you start bracing for impact, the moment you expect disappointment, the moment you automatically assume the worst, not to judge yourself, not to criticize yourself, simply to notice, because awareness creates space, and inside that space lies freedom. Freedom to choose a different response, freedom to create a different future, freedom to become someone new. Modern neuroscience tells us that the brain remains adaptable throughout life. New neural pathways can be formed, new habits can emerge, new emotional responses can be developed. This process is called neuroplasticity, and its message is powerful. You are not trapped by your past. You are not condemned to repeat old patterns forever. You are not permanently defined by what happened to you. Your brain can change. Your nervous system can change. Your expectations can change. Your life can change. But change rarely arrives through one dramatic breakthrough. It arrives through repetition, through small moments, tiny decisions, simple choices repeated consistently over time. Every time you choose trust instead of fear, you strengthen a new pathway. Every time you stay open instead of closing down, you strengthen a new pathway. Every time you move forward despite uncertainty, you strengthen a new pathway. And eventually, those pathways become stronger than the old ones. A new identity begins forming. A new emotional baseline emerges. A new version of reality becomes available, not because the universe suddenly changed, but because you changed. And when you change, the way you interact with reality changes too. The opportunities you notice change. The conversations you have change. The risks you're willing to take change. The energy you bring into every room changes. And slowly, almost invisibly, life begins responding differently. This is why acting as if everything works out is not about pretending. It is not about denying challenges. It is not about ignoring reality. It is about choosing the internal state from which you meet reality. A state of openness, a state of trust, a state of possibility, not because you know the outcome, but because you understand something deeper. You understand that the outcome has not been written yet. Most people wait for certainty before they trust, but certainty rarely comes first. Trust comes first, action comes first, faith comes first, and then reality responds. The people who seem lucky often aren't lucky at all. They simply stopped expecting life to betray them. They stopped negotiating with possibility. They stopped demanding guarantees, and they started participating fully in their own lives. That's the real shift, not controlling reality, participating in it, fully, openly, courageously, because courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is moving forward while fear is present. Trust is not certainty. Trust is continuing without certainty, and that changes everything. So the next time life places something important in front of you, a dream, an opportunity, a relationship, a new beginning, notice what happens inside. Notice the old voice. Notice the old program. Notice the familiar urge to brace for disappointment. Then pause. Take a breath, and remember this: the future has not happened yet. The story is not finished. The outcome has not been decided. And perhaps the most powerful thing you can do in that moment is choose trust, not because you have proof, not because success is guaranteed, but because you finally realized that the state you bring into life helps shape the life you experience. You are not merely watching reality unfold. You are participating in its creation, and maybe, just maybe, the version of you that has been waiting on the other side of fear, the version that trusts, the version that believes, the version that stays open when the old self would close, is already there, waiting, ready, one decision away. So from this moment forward, ask yourself a different question, not, what if everything goes wrong, but, what if everything works out? And then live as though the answer matters, because it does.